Welcome to Healthy Minds. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. Everyone is touched by psychiatric conditions, either themselves or a loved one. Do not suffer in silence. With help, there is hope. Today on Healthy Minds,
the principal research question was, and still is, what makes for a long and healthy life? There are 5 things that we can do. We could start doing every one of them today, and you don't have to call your insurance company for prior approval, and they're free. We can all take actions right now.
That's today on Healthy Minds. Healthy Minds is brought to you in part by the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, the Graham Beck Foundation, and the New York State Office of Mental Health. Welcome to Healthy Minds. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. What steps can you take to improve your mental and physical health? Today I speak with leading expert Dr. Lloyd Cetera about how to live a healthy life and specific steps you can take to manage stress and maintain health. Lloyd, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
It's great to be here. This is such an extraordinary program, Jeffrey, and I'm honored to be part of it.
Thank you. I want to jump into talking about your latest book, which really describes 4 key secrets that people, patients, families, and those of us in the profession should be aware of. I'll start by asking you, what brought you to write this book?
Well, I had read a short book, 62 pages, by the Pulitzer Prize-winning Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee, and it was called The Laws of Medicine. And it was a type of memoir where he reflected on some of the laws or learnings that he had as a young doctor. And they were really thoughtful. And I was on a 1-week hike. We have a lot of time to think. And I started to wonder, to puzzle, well, what's the analog for our profession? Are there, if not laws, are there 4 principles? Are there 4 truths that inform how we as individuals can care for ourselves and how clinicians can care for patients? And I came upon these 4 ideas. I jotted them down, and then I went and wrote the book, and I meant to write a short book, and it turned out to be that way. It's a little over 100 pages with pictures, so it's mercifully short, but it tells a lot of stories.
I guess the 5th secret is keep it short when you're writing a book. So tell us about some of the key points.
Well, there are 4 secrets, and I call them secrets hiding in plain sight. And for your audience and for others who are interested, these are ideas that should not be new. It's just that often we've narrowed our vision, and there are a lot of things that are really important that we may not be attending to. So I call them secrets hiding in plain sight. The first secret is behavior serves a purpose. And this is a principle, a secret, something to think about that applies as we look around and see people's behaviors. They could be relatives or friends. They could be, as clinicians, behaviors of people with a mental illness or an addiction. And they're behaving in ways that confuse us, perplex us. They defy reason, and sometimes they're downright contrary to a person's own interests. But they persist. And I began to think, well, these are behaviors that have to be serving that person. That's why they persist. Maybe not very well, but the best that that person knows so far. So for example, when people excessively use drugs or drink too much, or use marijuana, what is that doing for them? How is that reducing their social anxiety? How is that reducing their psychic or physical pain? How is that quieting their mind in a way that they haven't discovered other ways of doing? And these are problem behaviors that are ubiquitous. We see them all around. And then when it comes time to people with a serious mental illness or an addiction, beyond just excessive use of substances, for example, or gambling, there we see behaviors that are even more perplexing. People who are seriously depressed, who want to take their own lives, for example, or people who have psychosis, where they're reacting to ideas that are very different from the ones that we experience. They may be hearing voices, they may be frightened about being hurt, and that's driving their behavior. So this is about offering an idea that enables anybody to start with a question, rather than jump to conclusions or be judgmental.
It's almost like putting yourself in the shoes of the person to try to understand, why are they drinking too much? Why are they experiencing these voices or these other types of symptoms, thoughts of wanting to harm themselves, really putting yourself in that person's shoes?
Absolutely, and from a clinician's perspective, we call that the first step in establishing a therapeutic alliance, a way of understanding somebody. But when it comes time to a relative or a friend, it's the way of beginning a conversation, because it respects them. It begins to, it indicates that you as a person think that their behavior is not bad, you're perplexed about it.
And you want to understand it and sort of join them in helping them with whatever supposedly that behavior might be underlying.
And that's the first step in terms of somebody being able to do something about a problem behavior, is having somebody that they trust, that appreciates that this is a behavior that they need to do. They haven't found anything better so far.
Let's jump to the next secret.
The next secret is one that is as pervasive as everyday life is, as humanity is, and it's called the power of attachment. And here I tell a story about a study that began almost 4 generations ago. It's called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And it's been going on now since 1938. And initially in 1938, the researchers at Harvard enrolled 268 Harvard undergraduates. They were all men at the time. And the purpose of the research, and these young men agreed to be followed for the rest of their lives. And the principal research question was, and still is, what makes for a long and healthy life? That's something I'm interested in. And
we're all interested.
Right. What makes for a long and healthy life? And some people thought, well, these are privileged people, first men, now women, they're at Harvard College. But it turns out that fame and fortune did not predict a long and healthy life. Again and again, through 4 generations, thousands of subjects, the best predictor of a long and healthy life was the presence of an enduring, trustworthy relationship in someone's life.
The connection with someone that they know on an ongoing basis. It could be a parent, other relative, could be a teacher, someone else in their life that's important.
Someone that they have confidence that they can turn to, and that person won't judge them, and that person will put their interests first. The presence of enduring, trustworthy relationships. And in this study, that was, again and again, the best predictor of those men and women now who have had long and healthy lives. And it seems, so it can seem so simple, yet it's so powerful, because it is about the power of attachment. And there's a lot of research that's gone on for 100 years about attachment, which is a foundation in our psychology. And if we have what's called secure attachment, if we develop secure attachment, we can explore, we can develop, we can build lives where we have all kinds of skills and capabilities. And if we don't, we're going to have a very hard time of doing that. So this secret, the power of attachment, is built on an understanding of secure attachments and insecure attachments, and how important secure attachments are. And this study proves it again and again.
Let's go on to the third secret. We'll probably get back to some of these points, but let's go to the third one.
The third secret is, as a rule, less is more. As a rule, less is more. And here I want to tell you a parable, but it's a true story. So your viewers may want to do a fact check on this, but it's a true story. And it goes back to a standard of medical care that has existed since 1700 BC. And it's the standard of care for how a doctor would treat a battlefield wound. And in that ancient time, an Egyptian doctor wrote on papyrus that the proper care of a battlefield wound was to remove the debris, wash gently with water, and cover for natural healing. As a rule, less is more. And that standard prevailed for almost 3,000 years, and then something changed. And what changed was mankind invented gunpowder in the 9th century. And by the 13th, 14th century, gunpowder led to guns and weapons. Those became the principal weapons of war, and the principal wounds of war became gunshot wounds. And here's what's so implausible. The standard of care by the 13th, 14th century throughout Europe for a gunshot wound was to pour boiling oil onto the wound. Now, there was a theory based on the fact that these wounds became infected and that the boiling oil would actually reduce the incidence of infection. But imagine if you're a soldier and you're shot and you're faced with the choice of going to see the surgeon and having boiling oil poured into your wound, or just letting yourself do nothing, let yourself die peaceably. It's a tough choice. But that became the standard of care for 200 years. It persisted, even though its results were disastrous. Of course, it didn't work, but doctors continued to do it until 200 years later in the 16th century, when a French surgeon ran out of oil on the battlefield. So what did he do? Well, he removed the debris, he had some innocuous liquid, he poured it on the wound, and he covered it for natural healing. And the standard of less is more for wounds was restored. So why am I telling you this story? It may seem a little far-fetched. Well, it's a story about not only caring for battlefield wounds, but it's a story about caring for psychic wounds. And that's what so many people have encountered, people who have been traumatized as children, people who have been tortured, people who have been forced to immigrate from their homes, people who have been abused in their own family as adults, domestic violence. These are people who are profoundly traumatized. And we need to understand that working with them or approaching them or reaching them has to be done very, very gently. Less is more, because they're so fragile. And the same is true with people who have psychotic illness, for example. Their ego functioning, their ability to adapt to the world is very brittle. And if we try too hard, if we're too intense in our treatments, if we give them more medicines because they're not responding to regular doses, what we're going to do is actually drive them away, and we're going to usher in other kinds of problems.
The point isn't not to get treatment, but that the treatment that's given should be appropriate, and often less is more when you're getting treatment.
Yeah, and often what happens is, for example, if we have a patient who's not responding, let's say with depression, what's usually the first thing we do? We increase the dose of the medication. And so this is not a call for doing less, it's a call for being more comprehensive, thinking more about what are the other ways that somebody can be treated, not just by increasing their dose of medication. And the same is true when you think about it, when it comes time to those moments where we're talking with somebody who's having trouble. And for example, a woman who's in her 50s, who's a single mom and is employed, and she's profoundly depressed. And she's unable to go to work. And her kids are saying to her, "Mom, you gotta go to work. You're gonna lose your job, we'll lose our home," as if she didn't know it. So this is about, and so often when somebody doesn't hear us, we raise our voice, we exhort them to do more, when in fact what they may be doing is the best they can do. This is sort of an analog of the behavior serves a purpose. But when we amplify our efforts, we're apt to bring in other kinds of problems. As a rule, less is more.
Less is more. And now the next secret.
So the fourth secret is chronic stress and the chronic inflammation that it produces is the enemy.
So we know stress isn't good.
Yes.
That we knew already, but you're really taking it to a next level and putting it in this context.
Yes. I have two goals for my health. The first is I want to reduce the chronic inflammation in my body. And the second is I want to increase or improve my immune competency, the ability of my immune system to fight against infection, to fight against cancer. And we've learned that acute inflammation is a good thing. It promotes wound healing, it prevents infection. It's a good thing, it's very adaptive. But if acute inflammation doesn't subside, we enter a state of what's called chronic inflammation, and chronic stress is a major driver of chronic inflammation. And why is chronic inflammation bad? Well, it does all kinds of bad things in our body. For example, it promotes the laying down of those nasty fatty plaques in our cardiac arteries, in our cerebral arteries, putting us at greater risk for heart attack and stroke. It eats away at the beta cells in the pancreas, the cells that make insulin, and produces first insulin insensitivity, insulin that's not working too well, and finally the diabetes. And then the third thing that it does, there's many things, but one of the third and perhaps even more important thing that it does is it releases cortisol, the stress hormone in the body, with a steady flow. And cortisone impairs our immune functioning. It gets in the way of T cells and natural killer cells doing their job. So we're much more apt to get sick, get a cold, even get cancer. So those were my two goals. And I've tried to live by them. What I wrote about in this book is that these are problems that are by no means limited to people who have a mental or addictive disorder, but to all of us, because the bigger the lives that we have, the more demands upon us, the more likely our bodies are going to experience chronic inflammation.
So we all have stress to varying degrees. Everybody stressful to themselves,
Yes.
whatever it is. What can somebody do to combat that stress and therefore the inflammation that occurs?
We can all take actions right now, and every one of them are free, and I'll give you 5. The first is what we eat. Our bodies don't like sugary beverages. They don't like processed foods. They don't like too many French fries. They like fish and vegetables. The Mediterranean diet is a major way by which we can reduce inflammation in our body. Second, our bodies like exercise, and exercise quiets the inflammatory response. And I'm not suggesting that everybody go out and get a trainer who's merciless. And
You don't have to run the marathon to get enough exercise.
10,000 steps a day, and I've discovered that I can get many of those 10,000, by just pacing around my office, which I'm apt to do anyway. So 10,000 steps a day, you don't have to, as you say, go to a marathon. Sleep. Sleep is restorative. Sleep is an essential way by which our body repairs itself every night. Sleep quiets inflammation. And then relationships. Our bodies like and respond quiet when we have people who care about us.
Goes back to the attachment that we discussed earlier on.
And when we surround ourselves with people who are hurtful to us, our bodies don't like that, and the inflammation grows. So that's about finding people who you care about, who care about you, and finding ways to not be with people who are going to hurt you. And then finally, our bodies like, and inflammation is very responsive to a variety of what are called mind-body interventions, like yoga, meditation, mindfulness, slow breathing, also called yogic breathing. Our bodies are very responsive to these interventions, and they're all ones we can learn. You take your pick, and they all quiet inflammation. So there are 5 things that we can do. We could start doing every one of them today, and you don't have to call your insurance company for prior approval, and they're free.
And anybody could do it.
Everybody can do it.
And everybody could do it. And you could start doing it at any age.
Yes, yes. It's better when you start sooner, but our bodies are very resilient. So they respond to this set of activities, of these ways by which we're taking care of ourselves. We can reduce the chronic inflammation in our bodies. We all can actually find strength inside of ourselves. Doesn't necessarily happen right away, but if we keep hope alive, there's the likelihood that'll happen.
Never give up.
Never give up.
People can control stresses in their life, and sometimes they can control avoiding being around people who are negative towards them, who might bully them, who might be mean to them, even as adults and certainly as kids. What can people do to combat that? If they can't avoid a difficult situation, how do they fight that anyway?
It's hardest to fight when you're all alone. And many people think that they're alone with their problem, when in fact so many other people experience the same problem. And that's what's happening in schools with bullying, right? Which is that they're bringing all the kids up to speed about the fact that this is going on and how destructive it is and how it could affect them. So that a child who's being bullied doesn't have to be alone. There's a community that wants to help protect that child. And the same is true in terms of our families, our friends. There are people who want to support us and help us change who we spend our time with so we can have better lives.
I want to go to exercise a little bit more. What's the mechanism that exercise does this? How is exercise so healthy for us?
Yeah, well, exercise is healthy, and I'm no exercise physiologist, but it's healthy in a number of ways. First of all, it increases the strength of our cardiovascular system, so our hearts get stronger, our vessels become more resilient. Moreover, exercise quiets the inflammatory response. It quiets the way that our minds are overactive and our heart rate is too great. Exercise helps tone that down. Exercise helps us lose weight, and losing weight is an essential part of not just eating well, but eating moderately is an essential part of managing our health. And then exercise, if people engage in aerobic exercise, it releases in our brain a natural compound called the endorphins. And these are very much like opioids.
Except they're healthy.
They're healthy, and they make you feel, this is what a runner's high is about. This is how people sometimes feel if they do some aerobic exercise. They feel better. They just feel relieved of not just of their stress and their pain, because their brain is producing a natural compound that helps relieve not just physical pain, but psychic pain.
So even in the midst of stresses going on in one's life, if possible, take some time for yourself and exercise.
So one of my patients years ago, a very high-functioning professional man, used to come home from a really tough day, and what would he do? He'd pour himself a few ounces of whiskey and then proceed to quiet himself down. And whiskey's a very effective way of immediately quieting your body down. But he was starting to realize that he was becoming addicted to this, and that this was his only way. So instead of coming home and pouring himself a few ounces of liquor, he'd come home and he'd lace on his sneakers, and he would go for a 45-minute walk, almost no matter what the weather was, and longer on weekends. And he came to realize that his body felt better, and his ability, his stamina to not just for physical, but to be able to tolerate all the stresses of his day was stronger. So there are ways, there are solutions for us hiding in plain sight.
Lloyd, I want to thank you so much for all that you do, your leadership in New York State, across the country, and your outreach to people to help them live fuller, healthier lives.
Well,
thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's my privilege.
We all experience stress, but there are steps that each of us can take to manage stress. These include proper diet, regular exercise, adequate sleep, healthy relationships, and mind-body interventions such as yoga and meditation. These are ways you can help yourself on your own. And with help, there is hope. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. Goodbye. Do not suffer in silence. With help, there is hope. Healthy Minds is brought to you in part by the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, the Graham Beck Foundation, and the New York State Office of Mental Health. If you would like to watch our expert interview in its entirety, log on to bbrfoundation.org/healthyminds.